Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling a topic that is, it's arguably the most complex and consequential challenge facing any major military in the world.
It really is.
Projecting power globally. And we aren't just talking about the combat itself, we're talking about the sheer massive logistics of moving tens of thousands of personnel, all that heavy equipment, fuel, supplies.
Hundreds of thousands of tons of it.
Right, across oceans and continents, and doing it fast enough to actually matter in a crisis. It's like the ultimate military chess game, and it requires synchronization on a planetary scale.
That is the perfect way to frame it. If the Army is going to successfully execute its core function, which is prompt and sustained land combat, a capability outlined so clearly in documents like Field Manual 3.0, it first has to completely dominate the strategic and operational logistical challenge.
So that's our mission for this deep dive.
That's it. We're going to unpack the very specific doctrine that governs this entire process. We are digging into the strategic framework for deploying combat power, focusing on how the military prepares, executes, and sustains large-scale operations in these modern, highly contested environments.
And we're going to really focus on that critical execution phase, the one known as joint reception, staging, onward movement, and integration.
Exactly. The moment of truth.
We've pulled together a pretty comprehensive stack of foundational documents for this conversation. Our analysis today is it's grounded in several key sources. We're looking at Army Techniques Publication 335, which focuses so heavily on deployment operations, Joint Publication 335, which covers both deployment and redeployment.
And then you have the critical sustainment guidance from Field Manual 4.0.
And the operational guidance from Field Manual 3.0, plus the detailed instructions for managing the operational area you find in Army Techniques Publication 393.
Taken together, these documents really describe the foundational architecture for sustained global power projection in the 21st century.
Okay, so let's unpack this concept of force projection first. When we talk about it doctrinally, what exactly is the Army trying to achieve, and why is this capability so central to national power?
Well, force projection, according to Joint Publication 3.0, is defined as the ability to project the military instrument of national power from the United States or from another theater in response to operational requirements.
Okay, so a fairly broad definition.
It is, but for the Army, and this is what Army Techniques Publication 335 really emphasizes, this process is what enables its true expeditionary capability. It's the assurance that the Army isn't stuck at home. It's prepared to respond to a huge spectrum of threats, particularly the most challenging ones.
The big ones.
The big ones, what we call large-scale ground combat operations involving multiple corps and divisions.
So it's much more than just transportation. It's about making sure that the force, when it finally arrives, is optimized, organized, and ready to immediately jump into sustained combat.
Precisely. This complex, multi-layered process inherently requires unified action across all the military components. It demands meticulous organization of combat power through something we call force tailoring.
Force tailoring.
It's about getting the right specialized mix of forces for that specific mission and environment. You combine that with complex task organization and ensuring mutual support between all the components, as it's detailed in Army Techniques Publication 335.
So you can't just send a standard package.
Never. You have to adjust based on whether you're fighting in the jungle, the desert, or the Arctic.
And before the first piece of equipment even moves, there's a sub-process that might involve calling up huge portions of the nation's military capability. We're talking about mobilization.
Mobilization is a crucial strategic step. Joint Publication 405 defines it as the process by which the armed forces, or any part of them, are brought to a state of readiness for war or a national emergency.
And this includes activating the reserve components.
Oh, absolutely. The National Guard and the Army Reserve. It involves rigorously assembling, organizing, and preparing all the necessary personnel, supplies, and equipment long before that deployment sequence truly begins. If you need to activate a massive portion of the reserve structure, that process has to be synchronized flawlessly with the lift capacity.
Once that strategic decision is made and we know what force we need, the global planning architecture kicks into overdrive. We're talking about detailed, excruciatingly high-stakes planning required for deployment right up to the exact point of employment.
And the supported combatant commanders, those are the commanders who will ultimately receive and use the force, they build and validate these enormous movement requirements.
So how do they manage this immense scope? There has to be some kind of integrated system.
There is. The entire planning process is integrated through a joint command and control system. This is the Joint Operation Planning and Execution System. Most people just refer to it by its acronym.
So this is the central nervous system for all of this.
It is. Army Techniques Publication 335 describes it exactly that way. The central nervous system for military operational planning, execution, and monitoring activities globally. It incorporates standard policies, procedures, and systems, all designed specifically to give senior decision-makers the capability to plan and execute joint operations across the globe.
So everyone is speaking the same language, following the same timeline.
That's the goal.
And the critical, tangible output of that entire integrated planning system, the massive document that tells everyone what goes where, how it's packaged, and when it absolutely has to arrive. That is the time, phase, force, and deployment data.
The time, phase, force, and deployment data is foundational. It's really dual purpose. It's both a force requirement document and a transportation requirements document. Army Techniques Publication 335 confirms that this is the data-based, dynamic portion of the operational plan.
Dynamic, meaning it's constantly changing.
Constantly. It contains time phase force data, non-unit related cargo and personnel data, and all the associated movement information. And crucially, and this is the stressful part, it dictates the desired sequence for unit arrival at the port of debarkation.
That sounds less like a schedule and more like a massive interconnected chain reaction spreadsheet. I mean, if you change one cell, the ripple effect must be exponential.
That is the core insight you need to take away. Joint Publication 335 highlights the high potential for a sequential pattern of disruption when changes are made to that flow.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Think of it this way. The plan is designed to land Unit A's high-mobility artillery system on Day 5, but only after Unit B's maintenance package and specialized ammunition arrive on Day 4. If Unit B's lift is delayed for any reason,
then Unit A arrives with its big guns, but
it's immediately combat ineffective or unsustainable. The whole plan is built on these absolute dependencies.
So if a single unit misses its assigned flight or ship, it doesn't just bump to the next available transport slot, right? The entire operational timeline might need a fundamental, time-consuming reprogramming.
Exactly. And that reprogramming is governed by physics. We have to recognize the inherent difference in transportation modes. Airlift, while it's expensive and capacity limited, can respond relatively quickly to short-notice changes.
But not without a cost.
Not without a cost to efficiency, no. But sealift, which carries 90% of the cargo weight, requires immense lead times. You cannot simply divert an enormous cargo vessel mid-ocean or rapidly substitute one ship for another without causing days, maybe even weeks, of cascading delays.
The scale of it all just imposes these rigid constraints.
It does. Constraints on planning flexibility that you just can't overcome with enthusiasm or effort alone.
This strategic movement requires a highly specialized set of enablers. We rely on what's known as the strategic mobility triad. What are the three indispensable components of that triad?
Joint Publication 335 defines the triad simply. It's common user sealift, common user airlift, and prepositioning, which is stored both afloat and ashore. These three capabilities work in concert to meet the bulk of the nation's strategic mobility requirements.
So it's like a three-legged stool.
That's a perfect analogy. If any leg of that stool is weak, the entire projection strategy suffers. It ensures the ability to deploy and sustain military forces worldwide quickly and efficiently.
And the Army needs specialized locations to prepare and execute this massive movement. We call these power projection platforms.
Power projection platforms are Army installations and joint bases that are specifically designated and equipped to be capable of deploying one or more Army brigades, or even larger formations, in accordance with combatant command requirements.
And what if those aren't enough?
Well, Army Techniques Publication 335 also defines mobilization force generation installations. These are used when the requirements for mobilization force generation exceed the primary capacity of the larger, dedicated platforms. Both types have to possess adequate infrastructure, services, and planned surge capability to handle the immense temporary influx of personnel and material.
The third and strategically most vital leg of that strategy is making sure we don't have to rely entirely on sealift for all the heavy gear. This is where Army prepositioned stocks come into play. It's sort of giving us a head start.
A huge head start. Army prepositioned stocks are equipment sets stored globally, either on land or aboard ships. They're designed to rapidly equip forces deploying for contingencies, stability operations, or even defense support to civil authorities.
So what's the primary purpose of that?
As Army Techniques Publication 335 explains, the primary purpose of Army prepositioned stocks is to significantly reduce the initial strategic lift requirement for a predominantly continental United States-based force projection army. The insight here is leverage.
It's the ultimate fly-in, drive-out capability.
That's it. If a force can fly in its personnel and specialized gear and immediately pick up its tanks, trucks, and equipment upon arrival, the strategic transportation burden is dramatically lowered. It speeds up combat power generation by weeks.
So we've planned the deployment, the ships and planes are moving. Now, who is responsible for catching all of this and ensuring the destination, the operational area, is prepared to receive and support a large fighting force?
Right. This brings us to the crucial concept of setting the theater.
And whose job is that?
The primary responsibility for setting the theater falls on the Army Service Component Command, which is usually the theater Army headquarters. Army Techniques Publication 393 clarifies that setting the theater is a vital, continuous shaping activity. It happens across the entire spectrum of cooperation, competition, and conflict.
So it's not something that just starts when a crisis erupts.
No, it's the foundational work, the administrative, logistical, and technical scaffolding that provides the resources and necessary authorities for conducting military operations long before they're needed.
That sounds a bit administrative. What does that foundational work actually look like on a day-to-day basis, months before a crisis?
Well, Field Manual 4.0 provides the necessary detail. Setting the theater involves daily actions to provide essential services like logistics, financial management, and personnel services to any Army forces already operating within the area of responsibility.
And proactively.
More proactively, it involves intensive sustainment preparation of the operational environment. This means detailed assessments of critical infrastructure roads, ports, rail lines, pipelines, and local communications networks. It also means proactively negotiating and confirming host nation support agreements and diplomatic clearances, ensuring we can land, operate, and receive support legally and efficiently when the time comes.
That massive logistics effort can't be managed by a general headquarters alone. I assume it requires a specialized operational command.
It does, which brings us to the Theater Sustainment Command.
Okay.
The Theater Sustainment Command is the Army's senior logistics headquarters within an area of responsibility, according to Army Techniques Publication 393. Its focus is entirely on strategic and operational level sustainment support and management. It orchestrates the entire logistical effort within the theater.
And what are its core responsibilities?
Field Manual 4.0 details its 4 core operational responsibilities: theater opening, theater distribution, sustainment, and theater closing. The Theater Sustainment Command is, conceptually, the massive engine that makes the Army Service Component Command's vision of a prepared theater a physical reality.
Let's focus on that initial arrival of forces. You mentioned theater opening. What is the Army Service Component Command specifically responsible for regarding the physical infrastructure?
So the Army Service Component Command, executing through the Theater Sustainment Command, conducts theater opening. And this is a massive engineering and logistics effort. It involves establishing and operating ports of debarkation, both air and sea, from scratch if necessary.
And then building out from there.
Right. It requires creating a distribution system from those ports inland and setting up the initial sustainment infrastructure, like supply depots, maintenance facilities, and fuel points. And crucially, the Army Service Component Command retains the responsibility for the entire subsequent process.
The joint reception, staging, onward movement, and integration of all arriving Army forces.
Exactly. It owns the welcome mat and the initial transition process, as emphasized in Field Manual 4.0.
We have to shift now to the grim reality of modern conflict, the era of contested logistics. The doctrine has shifted fundamentally because the enemy is no longer granting us these safe havens in the rear area.
This is truly the most significant challenge in modern force projection. Field Manual 4.0 is stark in its assessment. It says the enemy now possesses extensive capabilities to detect, identify, interdict, and destroy sustainment forces.
And this is across the entire operational area.
Across the entire depth of it. From the strategic support area, including our home ports in the United States, all the way through the theater. Logistics is now a high-risk combat zone itself. The traditional notion of a logistics safe haven is gone.
What specific practical methods are peer adversaries employing to attack our logistical spine and create this contested environment? Give us a sense of what this looks like on the ground or in the digital realm.
The threat is multi-domain. Adversaries contest operations by using advanced space and cyberspace capabilities to disrupt communications, satellite navigation, and logistics tracking systems. They specifically target critical civilian infrastructure that we rely on: ports, bridges, rail hubs.
And on the ground itself.
Furthermore, they are employing sophisticated unmanned aerial systems or drones of every size and description, specifically against sustainment formations and fixed logistics nodes. The operational environment is becoming increasingly transparent due to commercial and military surveillance,
Making large fixed sustainment nodes highly vulnerable.
extremely vulnerable to precision interdiction and attack, which forces commanders to fundamentally rethink how they manage distribution and throughput.
That level of threat must necessitate massive mitigation strategies. We can't rely on long, predictable supply lines or large stationary depots anymore.
The doctrine explicitly mandates a fundamental change in approach. According to Field Manual 4.0, sustainment forces must be dispersed and disaggregated. This means equipment is likely to arrive at numerous smaller, non-traditional ports, rather than concentrating all lift at a single, massive port of debarkation.
And how does that affect movement?
We need operational security measures that limit personnel movements that could indicate imminent action. Utilize multiple dispersed staging locations hidden across a wide geographic area, and rely on alternating logistics routes to avoid predictability. It's a process known as moving with tactical patience and unpredictability.
So the goal is to make ourselves an impossible-to-hit, highly distributed target.
Exactly. And this decentralization requires highly skilled individuals. Field Manual 4.0 stresses that individual soldiers are now part of this security strategy. They must be trained and prepared to operate and communicate in denied, degraded, and disrupted environments.
For understanding that the enemy is always watching.
Persistently probing and disrupting individual, group, and army capabilities that depend on space and cyberspace domains for command and control.
We often discuss force projection exclusively in the context of large-scale ground combat, but this robust logistical framework is equally essential for stability and humanitarian missions. How does this sustainment planning fit into that?
The planning frameworks and logistical infrastructure are entirely scalable and adaptable. Army Techniques Publication 393 notes that United States Army North, for instance, conducts homeland defense planning and is explicitly prepared to provide defense support to civil authorities for complex disaster or emergency response situations.
Like major hurricanes or earthquakes.
Exactly, or even chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear events. The tremendous logistical capabilities built for sustained warfighting are leveraged for these vital domestic missions that require rapid response and throughput.
And there's a powerful real-world anecdote that demonstrates this complex coordination during a humanitarian mission.
The Operation Lifeline Pakistan relief effort following the devastating 2005 earthquake serves as an excellent case study. It's cited in Army Techniques Publication 393. United States Army Central was heavily involved, providing direct planning support and coordination for multinational forces.
What did that entail?
Well, it required meticulous management of the movement of personnel and equipment to Karachi Port, and then the complex onward movement north into the mountainous disaster areas. It required integrating sophisticated assets like Army and Marine Corps mobile hospitals, engineer support to clear roads, and dedicated lift support.
So all the key elements of the strategic sustainment enterprise.
Repurposed instantly for crisis response. It proves that the doctrine of setting the theater applies regardless of the mission's scope or hostility level.
We've planned the movement, we've set the theater. Now the execution phase begins with joint reception, staging, onward movement, and integration. This is the moment of truth, the transition from strategic movement to localized mission capability.
Joint reception, staging, onward movement, and integration is the essential, synchronized process that transitions deploying forces, personnel, equipment, and material into forces capable of meeting the combatant commander's operational requirements.
And what's the one main objective here?
Joint Publication 335 emphasizes that the entire process is hyper-focused on one objective, building mission-capable forces as quickly as humanly possible, minimizing the time they spend simply waiting or being processed.
What are the fundamental goals that govern this four-part process to keep the focus tight for commanders?
Army Techniques Publication 335 lays out three critical goals. First, the paramount goal is accurately matching personnel with their specialized equipment. Second, minimizing staging and sustainment requirements while transiting ports of debarkation. You don't want forces consuming resources unnecessarily. And third, commencing onward movement rapidly. Every minute spent sitting in the port is a minute loss building combat power in the tactical area. Time is combat power in this phase.
Let's break down the four segments, starting with reception, which is where the physical process begins.
Reception is defined by Joint Publication 335 as the physical act of receiving, offloading, marshaling, accounting for, and transporting personnel and material from the strategic deployment phase to the port of debarkation or the initial marshaling area.
It sounds like controlled chaos.
It is.
Yeah.
Getting massive amounts of unique cargo and people off ships and planes in a highly synchronized manner.
So what are the specialized organizations on the ground managing that chaos at the ports?
At airfields, the key coordinating organization is the Arrival and Departure Airfield Control Group. Army Techniques Publication 335 describes them as coordinating and controlling the rapid loading and offloading of units. They maintain coordination with the arriving unit and the Air Force's dedicated contingency response element.
So they're like air traffic controllers and ground logistics managers all rolled into one.
That's a great way to put it. At seaports, you have the Port Support Activity, which assists the Surface Deployment and Distribution Command with the technical process of loading and offloading equipment and cargo from the vessels.
A critical element of reception, and arguably the most challenging, is tracking every single piece of cargo and every person. How is the military achieving in-transit visibility in such a complex, time-sensitive environment?
This is where technology becomes indispensable for accountability. Units use sophisticated automated identification technology. This includes radio frequency identification tags, both the simple license plate tags and the more data-rich active tags, alongside standardized military shipping labels.
And this gives them a complete picture.
It does. Army Techniques Publication 335 explains that this suite of technology provides in-transit visibility from the origin, or home station, all the way to the final destination in the theater.
Can you elaborate on those radio frequency identification tags? How does that technology actually help a commander manage the deployment flow?
Well, the radio frequency identification tags are often attached to shipping containers, vehicles, or pallets, and they contain detailed electronic listings of all the unit equipment consolidated within that specific package. As the container moves through the port of embarkation, onto the ship, and then offloaded at the port of debarkation.
It's being scanned constantly.
Exactly. Fixed or handheld readers scan the tags. This provides real-time data to tracking systems like the Joint Operation Planning and Execution System and other logistics databases. This immediate, accurate data stream allows commanders to know precisely where their combat power is.
Which minimizes the risk of losing critical assets.
A major concern, especially when you're dealing with contested logistics.
Okay, moving on to segment 2, staging. What happens after the equipment is successfully offloaded, accounted for, and moved out of the immediate port area?
Staging involves temporarily holding and organizing forces and capabilities, preparing them for onward movement or direct tactical operations. Army Techniques Publication 393 notes that this phase is essentially about unit assembly and reconciliation.
Making sure the people who flew in are successfully matched with the equipment that came by sea.
Precisely.
And the staging process necessitates the use of the intermediate staging base. Why is this base required, and why is it located near but not in the area of operations?
The intermediate staging base is defined as a secure staging base established near, but crucially, not in the immediate tactical area. Army Techniques Publication 335 clarifies that this base is required because space and security limitations normally preclude the successful reassembly of large combat units directly at the ports of debarkation.
So the ports are just too concentrated and vulnerable?
Exactly. The intermediate staging base provides a geographically dispersed location, ideally with adequate infrastructure, where equipment and personnel are reconciled, maintenance checks are performed, and forces are tactically organized before moving forward.
What are the absolute critical functions necessary to run an effective intermediate staging base that supports rapid throughput?
Beyond security and basic life support, 3 elements are paramount. First, reliable, secure, and fully compatible communications are essential. The combatant commander needs real-time confirmation of when forces achieve combat capability.
And second?
Second, force tracking begins in earnest in the staging area. This provides the gaining commander situational awareness of certified combat-ready units within the operational area. And third, basic readiness checks and final mission preparation, ensuring every vehicle is operational and every soldier has their essential gear.
The third segment is onward movement, the transition from that secure staging area into the tactical assembly area, bringing them under the operational control of the gaining unit.
Right. Onward movement is the process of physically moving forces from the reception and staging areas to their designated tactical assembly area. Army Techniques Publication 393 notes, this is the crucial moment when they transition from strategic movement control to operational control by the gaining commander.
Preparing to execute their mission.
That's it.
This phase must carry huge risk, especially in a contested environment. I mean, you're moving large, identifiable convoys through potentially hostile territory.
It carries immense risk, and the doctrine recognizes this as a high vulnerability period. Army Techniques Publication 393 highlights that the onward movement phase offers the enemy numerous, tempting opportunities to inflict harm to friendly forces and delay the buildup of combat power.
How so?
The enemy can exploit the vulnerability of units in transit. The long convoys, the choke points, the need for frequent stops are all target opportunities.
So what are the key factors the Army Service Component Command and the moving units must meticulously manage to mitigate this vulnerability during transit?
Army Techniques Publication 335 lists 3 primary interconnected factors. First is movement control. This means intensely synchronizing movements to ensure they fit the traffic flow and the tactical timeline, avoiding congestion or predictable patterns.
Then you have the infrastructure itself.
Right. Transportation infrastructure ensuring the roads, rail lines, and bridges can handle the load and that alternatives are pre-planned. And above all, security protecting the force in transit from both conventional and unconventional attacks.
And the theater army has a distinct role in ensuring that security and logistics flow smoothly across vast distances.
Absolutely. The theater army's security roles, according to Army Techniques Publication 393, are wide-ranging. They include coordinating and leveraging host nation support and resources, like local security forces or traffic control, and acquiring contract support through mechanisms like the Army Logistics Civil Augmentation Program,
which acts as a massive force multiplier.
a huge one for services and logistics. And finally, allocating protection capabilities, such as military, police, or air defense assets, to enable freedom of movement along main supply routes. Security is a shared, layered responsibility.
Finally, we reach integration, the culmination of the entire process.
Right. Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 defines integration precisely as the synchronized transfer of units into an operational commander's force prior to mission execution.
Yeah.
The operational goal is straightforward, but, difficult to achieve.
And that is?
Reestablish full force readiness and ensure units are fully combat capable, both in terms of lethality and the sustainability of their logistics.
For the receiving combatant commander, what are the primary readiness checks that must be made before a newly arrived unit is officially declared integrated and ready for combat? This can't just be an administrative handoff.
No, it's intensely analytical. Joint Publication 335 specifies several critical tasks the commander must perform during this integration phase. They must definitively determine the units of physical combat capability, meaning are all their major systems operational.
And their logistics.
They must determine their logistic capability and confirm that their sustainment chain is linked up. They must determine how to track and visualize this new combat power within the theater. They establish an incremental build-up plan, prioritize and adjust the force flow as needed based on evolving requirements.
So it's an active management process.
It is. They must actively manage and supervise the unit's progress toward full mission readiness. Only when the commander is certain the unit is combat capable and sustainable is the process complete.
We've established that modern adversaries are contesting logistics from the strategic support area all the way to the forward edge of the battle area. Let's delve deeper into what this contested deployment means in practical terms, drawing heavily on Field Manual 3-Day.
The threat to deployments starts long before the port of embarkation. Field Manual 3-Day warns that ports of embarkation, whether they are massive civilian hubs in the United States or smaller military ports overseas, are highly likely targets.
And what kind of threats are they facing?
They face threats from cyberspace attacks aimed at disrupting logistics processes, space capability degradation or denial, and even long-range fires during armed conflict. The enemy's goal is simple and direct. Reduce our capability or capacity to move forces by disrupting the flow at the choke points.
Let's make that tangible. What does a cyberspace attack against a port of embarkation look like? It's not just jamming communications, right?
No, it's highly targeted disruption. Imagine a sophisticated enemy attack locking up the container crane scheduling software, confusing the customs manifests, or subtly altering the radio frequency identification tracking data.
So complete chaos.
If a port relies on automated systems to sequence the loading of hundreds of thousands of containers, and that sequencing is compromised, the port's throughput capacity can drop to zero instantly. That creates bottlenecks, delays the deployment flow, and severely impacts the combatant commander's ability to build combat power on time.
This is truly a multi-domain battle before the physical ground combat even begins. And the threat extends not just to systems, but chillingly to our people and their families via information warfare.
That is a deeply worrying modern trend the Doctrine recognizes and stresses. Field Manual 3.0 states clearly that the threat uses social media surveillance of soldiers and their family members to identify deployment timelines, unit compositions, and specific locations.
Wow.
Threat agents meticulously comb through personal data legally or illegally obtained through application and device user agreements or on the dark web to build precise intelligence profiles. They turn personal privacy against military security, targeting key leader movements and identifying vulnerabilities in the deployment timeline.
So protecting the deployment timeline requires strict digital and personal discipline from the entire force and their families. Every public post is potential intelligence for the adversary.
Absolutely. And this requires aggressive, relentless operations security training, starting long before any deployment order is issued. Furthermore, Field Manual 3.0 emphasizes that Army forces must proactively support joint force and national efforts to provide timely, relevant information to the American public while rigorously maintaining operations security.
And also countering disinformation.
We must also actively counter the disinformation campaigns targeting soldiers and their families through social media and other platforms, as the peer threat uses high volumes of disinformation to confuse, demoralize, and influence public perception of the deployment.
Turning to physical security during the actual movement to the ports. How does the Doctrine ensure units are protected even while driving across the massive stretches of the continental United States?
Well, Army Techniques Publication 335 stresses that consistent security preparation must occur at the home station on a daily basis, so units will be fully prepared for both the potential terrorism threat and the peer threat during deployment and redeployment.
So the planning is comprehensive and continuous.
It has to be. Movement planning, intelligence collection to identify local threats, detailed threat assessment, security planning, and comprehensive anti-terrorist awareness training for all personnel. This isn't just a concern for overseas deployment. It starts the moment the unit begins moving from its home station. The logistics and coordination required for large military convoys moving on civilian roads, often intermingling with commercial traffic, must be immense, and I imagine it's highly regulated. It is strictly regulated because of the safety and security risks involved. For convoy operations greater than 100 miles, but less than 300 miles from the port of embarkation, Army Service Component Commands and senior commanders may approve those.
And for Reserve and National Guard forces?
For them, the first general officer in the chain of command may approve operations in the continental United States that meet those distance criteria. This approval structure ensures that a senior officer has fully assessed the security and risk implications of moving large formations on public roadways.
Moving from security to readiness, let's talk about the specific programs the Army uses to track and assess whether a unit is deployment ready before the deployment order even hits.
Right. This prevents costly logistical failures down the line. The Army uses several key deployment programs that act as crucial tools for training and assessing readiness, and they're detailed in Army Techniques Publication 335.
What are the main ones?
The two main ones are Deployment Readiness Exercises and the Command Deployment Discipline Program.
What do these look like in practice, especially the deployment readiness exercises?
Deployment readiness exercises practice and assess the unit's mastery of deployment operations. A Level 2 exercise, for example, is highly complex. It sets conditions for units to achieve rigorous deployment readiness standards, reinforces critical training on processes and procedures.
And it includes tangible, physical actions.
It does. This involves the meticulous loading of containers, inspecting all documentation, verifying hazardous material documentation, and it may even use transportation mock-ups to simulate the physical loading onto ships or aircraft. These exercises are designed to expose process flaws before they become real-world problems.
And the Command Deployment Discipline Program, what is its specific purpose? It seems focused less on the physical movement and more on administrative rigor.
That's correct. The Command Deployment Discipline Program is a continuous command inspection program designed to standardize, track, and assess deployment activities throughout the command structure. Its purpose is vital. It catches discipline failures that could, if left unchecked, shut down a major port.
For example?
For instance, if a container is mislabeled, contains unauthorized items, or has poor hazardous cargo manifests, the receiving port, civilian or military, can halt its processing entirely. This program ensures the administrative rigor required for international high-volume shipping is maintained.
And the individual at the heart of making sure the unit's readiness data is accurate and compliant is the unit movement officer.
The unit movement officer is a technically proficient position. It's often viewed as purely administrative, but their accuracy is pivotal to the success of the overall operation. They are responsible for providing absolutely accurate unit movement data to the joint planning and execution community.
And this data directly influences the time phase force and deployment data.
It does, that essential global schedule we discussed earlier. If the unit movement officer is proficient, it significantly enhances unit readiness and the success of the overall deployment. If they fail, the entire sequence can be compromised before movement even begins.
Finally, we must complete the cycle. What about the end of the operation? Redeployment is not just moving in reverse, it's a critical readiness step itself.
Redeployment planning is often overlooked, but is defined by Army Techniques Publication 335 as an integral part of employment planning. It must be coordinated with mission termination or transition plans from the very start.
And the goal upon arrival back at home station.
The ultimate goal is not just offloading, but immediately beginning reset activities, maintenance, recovery, and training to ensure force readiness is reestablished for subsequent missions. If a unit takes too long to reset, that degrades national readiness.
What are the specific closure tasks required to successfully complete the redeployment phase?
The key tasks involve meticulous accounting. This includes tracking every piece of redeploying equipment from the port of embarkation in the theater to the port of debarkation at home. It requires coordinating customs inspections prior to loading the cargo to comply with import laws.
And then closing the loop.
And finally, accurately reporting the closure of personnel and equipment to the Army Operations Center, confirming the force is back in place and ready to be tasked for future missions.
This deep dive into sustaining power projection has fully illuminated the immense, almost paralyzing complexity of moving military force in the 21st century. To recap the strategic architecture, force projection is enabled by the Strategic Planning System, the Joint Operation Planning and Execution System.
And it's materialized in that massive sequencing document, the time-phased force and deployment data.
This strategic movement is managed globally by the Army Service Component Command and operationally executed by the Theater Sustainment Command,
which oversees theater opening, distribution, sustainment, and closing. And the crucial transition from strategic movement to tactical capability is achieved via the four synchronized elements of joint reception, staging, onward movement, and integration.
And every step of this process, from home station preparation and ensuring compliance with the Command Deployment Discipline Program to the high-risk onward movement phase, is complicated by a multi-domain contested threat.
A threat that targets our systems, our infrastructure, and even the operational security of our families through sophisticated information warfare. The entire sustainment network has to operate with maximum dispersion, flexibility, precision, and high pervasive security.
And we must always remember the critical, non-negotiable link between sustainment success and combat power generation.
Absolutely. As Field Manual 4.0 warns, if sustainment fails to keep pace during offensive operations, the result can be a tactical pause or, worse, the culmination of offensive operations.
Meaning the force stops short of its objectives.
Because it simply ran out of fuel, ammunition, or repair parts. Sustaining operations in large-scale combat requires dispersion, precision, and relentless innovativeness from logistics commanders and forces who are now operating deep inside the enemy's targeting zone.
That brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you reflect on this massive logistical undertaking. We've discussed the imperative for in-transit visibility, tracking every vehicle and container with sophisticated technology like radio frequency identification tags from origin to the final destination in the theater. This provides commanders with maximum visibility and control over their assets. But we also established the overriding need for maximum dispersion and concealment to ensure survivability against a high-tech peer adversary who can see everywhere. Where, in a future operational environment saturated by both military and commercial sensors and space capabilities, should the trade-off line be drawn by commanders between the imperative for maximum visibility of friendly forces for logistical control and the imperative for maximum dispersion and concealment to ensure survivability?
It is the ultimate logistical and operational paradox that future commanders must solve, balancing visibility against vulnerability in every single phase of deployment.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.